what I would like to say and discuss with you and with Dimitri in particular is what are the main challenges for the peoples, lato sensu, in the circumstances today, at the present stage of global capitalism. I don't want to be academic. I want to be political. And I keep in mind that that might be and should be, I hope, listened by Chinese people, because I'll try to draw some conclusions about what is the challenge for China in particular and for the Chinese people. Now, I think we ought to, from the start, to distinguish two things: the crisis within capitalism from the crisis of capitalism. Now, crisis within capitalism, we had many crises of that kind throughout the 19th century in particular, but the present crisis, which, and I will say something about it, started mid-70s of last century, 50 years ago, and it's continuing with ups and downs, but it's continuing. It's not an economic crisis, it's a systemic crisis of capitalism, which means that we have reached a point where capitalism has moved from growing positively, expanding, deepening, with many negative aspects for many people, but also some historical positive aspects, into a period of that I dare call senile capitalism, that is declining. Declining doesn't mean neither that it will die by itself. We have just to wait until it dies. So I was saying it's a crisis of capitalism, of senile capitalism, which, as I said, one doesn't mean that capitalism is going to die slowly by itself and quietly. It doesn't mean also that there are not features which appear to be brilliant, such as new technologies, such as high growth here and there, such as I don't know what. No. Capitalism has been meeting by its nature, and that was, I think, what Marx alone understood. Nobody else understood that, which is the most fundamental. That it is a system which is not viable, because it is based on an internal contradiction beyond class struggle, which is commonplace, by the fact that the conditions for its smooth reproduction and expansion is in contradiction with the basic pressure on wages, the price of labor, so that there is a tendency of capital profits to be always too high and cannot be reinvested for the expansion of the system. Capitalism has been able to overcome continuously that contradiction during a century, maybe a century and a half. Let's say from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, end of the 18th century, to the Second World War, grosso modo. By expanding internally, by absorbing pre-capitalist systems, and externally by conquering the peripheries and constructing a periphery which could provide an answer to this contradiction. But it has reached now, this is my view, it is not shared by many people. But I have not seen, nowhere at least, any convincing argument against it. There is rhetoric against it. And precisely this rhetoric is that we have a beautiful new technologies and so on and so forth, which is not the problem. Is the following, that in a very short period, at the beginning of this crisis of capitalism, which started with the US dollar delinked from gold, 1971, and then 1973, the rate of exchange on the market system for the financial flows and monetary systems. In a period of 3-4 years, not more, even less, 2 or 3 years, the average rate of growth for the Triad, US, Europe, and Japan, went down to half of what it has been on the average for the 30 years before, from after World War II to 75, 45, 75. And they have never recovered since, never. They remain half on the average, and the trend is to be less and less. Well, some people say that means that capitalism is sick in the old West, United States, Europe, and Japan, but is growing elsewhere, particularly in China, but also India, Brazil, and other countries with high rates of growth, and therefore that it's only that the center of gravity of capitalism is perhaps moving to other places. I think this is nonsense, because the other parts where it is apparently growing remain subjugated to the centers. They remain peripheries. Now, what has happened with this long crisis was that what was the response of capital to the challenge? The response was 3 strategies. One, deepening the strength, reinforcing the strength of monopoly capital. That is, monopoly capital is not something new. It had already 80 years of age, at least. But now monopoly capital has reached a point which I think must be qualified, a new stage. I have called it generalized monopoly capital. Why generalized? We can call it late monopoly capital, post-monopoly capital, I don't know what, but these are semantic. What is the content? Is that monopoly capital now, at that stage, has been able for the first time to control everything. That is all, or almost all, the forms of production which are not directly owned and managed by monopoly capital are submitted to the status of quasi-subcontractors, meaning that they are controlled, overflow, by those who provide the inputs, the credit, and so on, and downstream, overstream, and downstream by those who control the markets and so on. Now, the example of agriculture is typical of that in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere. But that is one. But that monopoly is not only, it I stress, it is a monopoly, a strengthened monopoly of control, not necessarily of property. Property is something else. For instance, the formal property juridically can be millions of people, the shareholders, but it's meaningless. The decision is in the hand of a handful of those who control the decision. That is one. But also because of their overall control and exclusive control, I would say. Previously, they were compelled by the political, social balances within the various countries to make compromise with other segments of the bourgeoisie, with the petty entrepreneurs, with the I don't know what, with these ones, including with some, with the working class in some cases. Now they are not. They are not. So that is the abolition. It gives them a total power, which means the end of the formal bourgeois democracy. Left and right had a meaning. Left meant conservative, right meant reformist, but real reforms. Now it's meaningless. Socialists have become social liberals. There is a consensus that nothing can be done against the so-called market. What is meant by market is the control of monopoly capital over the market. It's not the market by itself. And the blah blah in China about the virtues of the market do not take into account the reality. What market are we speaking of? Now, third aspect of the domination over the medias. The medias have become what I'm calling a clergy in the service of monopoly capital. They all repeat the same thing, and they all say the same. On any question, whether they take their orders and they just repeat the thing that must be said. And the fourth aspect is the pseudo-cultural or pseudo-culture, the formatting of the people to think that they are free individuals when they are in fact depoliticized. They are no more citizens and working people. They are consumers and spectators of the TV. So that's, again, maximal alienation. The present system is close to what is totalitarian regime. Much more than what was said about the Soviet Union, for instance, or China of Mao, or even if it were it was very different, Hitler and the fascists. Totalitarian. But it is a soft totalitarianism, which means that it doesn't request for the people to support them positively by demonstrating, but just to accept. Soft. But this soft, if you resist, it can become hard, and it can become criminal against you, criminalize the opposition and the resistance. Now, this is point one, the response of capital to that. New age of monopoly capital. And I call it declining monopoly capital. Because capitalism was able to manage the system by other means, by the means of the bourgeois democracy, by the means of historical compromises with a variety of classes, by the means at the international level also of compromise, sometimes wars also, but also compromises, division, partition of the world. You have an influence there, we have an influence there, you have colonies there, we have colonies elsewhere, and accept one another. Now they cannot. So the second feature, which is new also, in my opinion, is what I'm calling the collective imperialism of the Triad. That is, the centers of historical imperialism, which were first the major countries of Europe and United States, a little later Japan, the Triad, plus their external provinces, as I say, Australia, Canada, have become fundamental allies. That is, it doesn't mean that there is no conflict among them on interests here and there in a region or in somewhere. But it means that they have understood that they cannot manage the world because they represent 15% of the world population. They cannot manage the rest of the world, which includes China and Russia, but also all Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, without being in solidarity, having the same. And they accept the leadership of the US, because the US is the military master. It has almost alone the means of interfering, destroying, without being limited by its internal opinion even. There is no opinion in the US. The US can decide to bomb here and there. Nobody will protest in the US. Oh, some people, individuals, some groups, but not the society. So that is collective. Imperialism until the Second World War was to be conjugated in plural. There was not imperialism. There was British imperialism, American imperialism, French imperialism, German imperialism, Japanese imperialism, also in conflict among themselves and leading even to big wars. Now we can speak of imperialism, not the empire, but imperialism, but collective imperialism. Now, that is the second feature of the stage where we are. Now, that system is not viable. Not viable precisely because what it offers to 85% of the world population is miserable. Perhaps not in the case of China, because it happens to have been associated with two brilliant success of China, one, the Maoist period, and second, the post-Maoist period, and modernization of China very fast, and with a very big country, not a small one. It's not Taiwan, because the miracle of Taiwan can be explained by the strategy of the US to have it, to face China, but not the miracle of China. That is the result of the struggles and the political choices of the Chinese, the ruling classes and the people, and in their contradictions, but also in their common moving up. Now, therefore, facing that, there is not only the danger, but we see it already, that the collective imperialism has understood that it cannot manage the world except by the use of more and more violence. This is one, in my opinion, of the symptoms of a decline of a system. A system which is not declining does not need to more and more violence. It can be violent here and there, but not need systematic and systematically more and more violence. This is why a declining system is not a system which is going to die by itself. Either you kill it or it kills you. And again, I go back to Marx. Marx said that the struggle, we can say the class struggle, but also the class struggle lato sensu, which becomes the political struggle, which includes internal struggles of classes, but external struggles of so-called nations, in the geopolitical sense. These struggles have reached the point where either revolution, even if the word is pompous with a capital R, and I will say something about that, that is an attempt to be lucid that the system is senile, that its senility is very dangerous, that senility means more and more violence, not peace and democracy, plus welfare perhaps, or plus growth of GDP with inequalities, or perhaps with reducing a little the inequalities. No, it means exactly the opposite. Growing inequalities within the societies, between the societies, more and more plunder, including the so-called ecological plunder, that is capitalism. This capitalism is not able to deal with the questions of how to limit the not only the waste, the small waste, but the destruction of the reproduction of life, and perhaps the earth even, and so on. So we have to understand that. This is my analysis of the present crisis of the system. Therefore, I will say two things. Therefore in general, and therefore for China in particular. Therefore in general, either there is a lot of resistance to that, local resistance, I would say, which are not united, which are many émiettés, how do you say in English, many resistance on specific problems, which means, which is growing. You can see it even by the social resistance in France today to more direct rule by financial monopoly capital in the frame of the collective imperialism and so on. You can see it everywhere. You could see it even by the explosions, like the explosions in Arab countries. You can see it by within Europe itself, by Greece, the Tsipras affair, and you can see it everywhere. But without lucidity, that is what I mean by lucidity. Those people who are struggling, these are mostly legitimate struggles. I'm not questioning it. I mean, when women struggle for equality of rights, equality of salaries, for instance, it's legitimate. But they don't relate their problem to the globe, to this systemic crisis of capitalism. And so on for the others, for everybody. Which means that those struggles at the present stage, fragmented, they are on the defensive, which means that the initiative is left in the hands of the ruling class of monopoly capital, and it's a response to that. They don't have a counter project, communism, a higher stage of human civilization, made possible at the present level of development of productive forces. But they don't have it. Now, what is needed is precisely to move from a defensive strategy of fragmented movements to an offensive strategy of relatively united movement, which means many things. It means, one, internationalism, and that is fundamental. It means, two, the capacity within each nation, to take the Maoist expression, to manage the contradiction within the people. Not everybody, even of the people, the working people, have in the short run the same interests. But managing that. And for that, to be lucid, we need an organization, or we need organizations at all levels, from the national level, because politics is still going to be run for a long time within societies which are called nations, whether they are plurinational, single nation, these are other problems. And at the international level, that organization has a name, the International. Now, the International here, I would say two things about it. One, it cannot be a remake of neither the second nor the third International, which were based on the idea one country, one party, or what Lenin said, one class, one party, and all the other organizations are transmission belts of that one party, the good one. Whether a reformist one, like the Second International was, a European and reformist, imperialist Europe and reformist, or anti-capitalist and more global, including Chinese, Iranians, Arabs, Latin Americans, Africans, Indians in the international, but one party. No, it cannot be that. It should be, it's more difficult. The challenge is how to unite with respect of diversity. That is to have many organizations, different organizations, and not only so-called political parties, but also trade unions, also popular associations in struggle, provided, of course, one, that they understand and accept that what unites us is more important than what divides us. Second, that they keep their independence of thinking, and that we are not going to have a trial on their ideologies. Are you Marxist or not Marxist? Are you, this or that? They can keep their historical roots and so on, and references if they wish, but provided that they are in struggle, not they accept to be manipulated by monopoly capital as instruments for them. Now, that is what we need. We are very far from that. Even the idea is not considered, neither within any country or almost, nor at the international level, at the global level. They believe, and you have examples of that, they believe that each one should be completely independent and conduct his struggles, and that they are often even in disagreement, deep disagreement with the neighbor, which is also struggling, etc., for one or another reason. Questions of short-run interest, or questions of ideologies or pseudo-ideologies or historical reference or anything else. Now, this is why, at best, if we have that, this is a degree of what I'm calling just lucidity. Try to have more lucidity, understanding of what is the real enemy and what are should be allies, and what is the target, and stressing on immediate or short-run strategic advances. This is what I'm calling, rather than revolution, we have been used to call it revolution, not since the Marxist and the communist movement, but even before, from the French Revolution. That comes from there. I would prefer to understand it as revolutionary advances, which means that they are not good. They prepare possible, but only possible, later other revolutionary advances. And they compel the enemy to be on the defensive and to withdraw and to become, therefore, a little less aggressive because they are forced to be so. That is the best thing. The other way of change, historical change, is through decadence, which means that there would be no lucidity. The movements would remain fragmented. The ideological cultural references could be anything, including love of the past, idealizing their past as being finding the response to their present problem and the future in the past, not looking into the future. It can take a pseudo-religious form, not only among the Muslims, but you find it among the Christians, you find it among the Buddhists, you find it among the everywhere, Hinduist, etc. Or pseudo-racial, like ethnicity. The case, the bad good case is the case of Yugoslavia. What does mean being a Serb or a Croat, as fundamentally different, etc. Or in Africa, so-called tribal. I don't use the word, but so-called, because some of those tribes, they are 40 or 50 million people. They are more more in number than the Dutch people or the people of Iceland, who are called nations. But anyway, in that case, history continues, but by itself, without, the human beings are not active actors knowing where they want to go. They have abandoned completely lucidity. That has happened in history. And the case is, the most known case is the decadence of the Roman Empire. Some people speak of a bourgeois revolution for capitalism to appear. Some people speak of socialist revolution for beyond capitalism moving towards socialism to appear. But nobody speaks of a feudal revolution in the Roman Empire. Feudalism was the product of history without anyone having a project of replacing the old Roman Empire by what became feudalism, in Western Europe at least. So we have cases of that. Those cases, and the comparison, in my opinion, is very important and dramatic. If we look at the case of the Western Roman Empire, it took 600 years, perhaps 1,000 years of really decline of the societies, with invasions, with in demographic terms even, the population of the Roman Empire declined for 5 or 6 centuries, the Western one. The Eastern one, to which we belong, Dimitri and I, had a decline of another, a little more mastered by the ruling class locally, and therefore it took longer with its more, I would say, negative aspects than positive, finally. And we are in such a... Now, people should be aware of that. Now, I come to what I derive from this analysis for China. I don't classify China today too quickly. Is it capitalist? Is it socialist? It is neither socialist nor capitalist. It is still a society of the periphery in struggle, started on the long road to socialism and making a compromise with global capitalism, which reflect that there are two the forces which are struggling for moving the country towards really being absorbed in capitalism or moving ahead towards on the long road to socialism. Now, I will say 2 or 3 words on the so-called Chinese characteristics and where is China today. Chinese characteristics, I'm not shocked by that, because the long road from out of capitalism, I'm saying the problem, the challenge is not to try to support moving out of the crisis of capitalism, within capitalism, but moving out of capitalism in crisis of decline, which is something very different and a different perspective and strategy. Now, if and China is should be put in that framework. Now, what are the two major illusions that I feel are present in China? One is the illusion of easy success, that things can continue to be as they have been for 70 years, and not only the 40 last years of post-Maoism, but also the 30 years of Maoism, successful. We have a long history, and we are big people, a big nation. We have been in the past at a very glorious position in the world, and we are going back to have this position, and easily. And there are some problems, internal and external, some enemies, but they are not dangerous or important. So we can deal with all that by a good politics and nothing more. This is a very, very, very big and dangerous illusion. And I think that this illusion is not only particular to probably a good part of the ruling class, but a large part of the middle classes, which have been more than the others benefited from this success. From a very small middle class 70 years ago to 300 million people today, which is not a small thing. So that is very, very dangerous. The second one is, in the present conjuncture, China has chosen a strategy of, instead of trying to participate to that globalization, but trying to control its participating to that globalization, and therefore the benefits of it and minimize the negative aspects of it. And we hear very often in China this type of language. We can take advantage of that and be careful about, there are some dangers, but we are aware of them and we can keep them out. This is, now, and China is participating to globalization, particularly trade globalization, and with an aggressive export policy even. That is one. To capital globalization, capital, not finance, not finance. Capital globalization in the sense of accepting foreign investment in China or inviting them even, and also starting being investing outside. With, for the foreign investment in China, a certain degree of control of the state over that. It is not as open. I mean, no country could be more open to foreign investment than the African countries. They have no rules to stop anything. And the foreign investments are not done in Africa. They are going to China, where they are controlled. A curious control, which is a mixture of the state apparatus operating over some degree of control, of associating private new bourgeoisie, Chinese new bourgeoisie, of a variety of forms. That is a negotiated participating to global investment, global capital, capital globalization. But China has kept, until now, I'm saying until now, out of the financial globalization. That is, it has remained, and it is almost the only country now in which all the banks, or 95% of the activities of the banks, are state-controlled. Not only Chinese, but state-controlled. And the yuan is run by the Central Bank of China. That means by the Chinese government, not by the market. Now, the maximal pressure is done on China on that ground, specifically. You should move towards participating to financial globalization. And I'm saying, and I would like to repeat it, and to have it understood by the Chinese, including at the highest level, top level, that moving into financial globalization would be a final disaster. It would destroy China. It would destroy all that you have been able to successfully conquer during 70 years. Everything. And I give a sample of that. Thanks to not participating to the global, financial globalization, the GDP of China, whatever is the meaning of that, I don't want to go into details. I have some doubts about the way it is calculated, the meaning of this calculation and so on. But anyway, in purchasing power is being said 18% of global GDP. In current yuan or dollars, because there is a fixed Chinese decided fixed rate, it is 16%. The difference is very small. If you compare to India, which is participating to the global financial system, In purchasing power, it's half of China, 8% of GDP, global GDP. But in dollar, 2% and less than 2%, which is a gigantic difference, which means a destruction, a capacity of foreign capital to plunder in a variety of forms. That is a very important point. If you add to that the success of China has been based since Mao, and since Mao even before the victory of 49, from the civil war, from the war in the south to the long road and so on, has been to integrate and associate the majority of the peasants in the struggle for rebuilding China, say, rebuilding the society. I'm not saying building socialism, things understood by them. And that has been kept until now, with ups and downs, with errors, but which were corrected. But ups and downs has been kept by maintaining state formal property managed by the local communities and with a target of, as far as possible, equal rights, equal access to land. It's never beautiful, equal, but tending to that. That is fundamental. If land is changed into, becomes a commodity, like in normal capitalism, in the history of capitalism, it would be the end of the Chinese peasantry. That it would be destroyed. You take an example, China and Brazil, or China and India and Brazil. China has been able, with 6% of the arable land, to feed correctly, I would say, 22% of the world population. The ratio of arable land to population in Brazil is not twice better than China, is 17 times better than China. 17. I have calculated it. Brazilians have calculated it. 17 times better. China is a country where you don't see extreme poverty. You see it somewhere in places here. It does exist. But you don't see it massively. It's a poor country where you don't see poverty, to say it short. Brazil is a rich country where you see exclusively poverty. That is, two-thirds of the population live in favelas, in two-thirds of the population. So that's a gigantic difference, and you should be aware, therefore, that abandoning living, and there is pressure on that from internal forces, of course, some potential rich peasants associated to agro-business, foreign and local, associated to a new Chinese bourgeoisie, including a state bourgeoisie, would like to have land, access to land, but and external forces which are pressing in that. That would be the destruction of China also. And I think on those 2 points, I stress on those 2 points. There are a lot of points, but if the Chinese, including leadership, understands that it is that the dream of becoming a top power because of population, it would become the first country in the world, not only in population, but in production of anything, is a very naive dream. And therefore, those who have those dreams will make easier, or will be surprised by the aggressivity of the enemy. That is, taking advantage of the weakness of China at some point, they will simply go to war, including nuclear war. And I always repeat that in an internal document of Pentagon, which was approved and signed by Clinton, which is considered a little better than some other presidents before and after, accepted the idea of, at that time, having 600 million Chinese exterminated by a nuclear war. And he said this is a possibility. If China becomes dangerous, what means dangerous? China is not going to destroy the United States by a nuclear war. Has not that strategy in mind. Becoming dangerous means becoming a prosperous country, capitalist country. They don't accept that. I give an example. When there was a historical social compromise in Russia, in Soviet Union, between communist forces and the peasant bourgeoisie, the NEP policy, Soviet Union accepted for a time a kind of local capitalism along a socialist power. But that did not stop the West from the Cold War against Russia, against Soviet Union. They did not recognize, they did not accept the NEP. They saw that it was a stage possible, but which in the last finally will be useful for socialism to move ahead later, but to move ahead. And therefore they fought it, as well as they fought collectivization, as they fought Soviet Union after the Second World War and so on. So be careful of that. Have it in mind. You must have it in mind. I give another sample, which is today. I mean, it happens that the easiest menace of the United States against China is against North Korea and Iran. One, probably, certainly, nuclear power, small but still, Korea. The second, possibly, which could become a nuclear power easily, Iran, to focus on them and to say they have to be destroyed. Destroyed. Not only, that is a direct menace. The support of the United States to a semi-fascist kind of remilitarization of Japan is typical. And the attempt to use the disastrous problem of the South Sea of China to divide, to separate China from friendship with China and Vietnam, from solidarity against imperialism, is typical of that. Now, so you ought to be very aware that the menace is a real menace of destruction of China. It's not a continuous prosperity. And therefore, the need for China to play a role in supporting, they cannot, Chinese people cannot replace the Egyptians and the Greeks, and in thus the Greeks and the Egyptians are responsible of themselves. But try to have a strategy, a policy which support the idea and the moving towards an international is fundamental. A good joke, a citizen of the US, very ordinary person who had never traveled outside of the US, goes for the first time to Britain. And he says, he phoned to his back to his family in the US, he says, I'm in a strange country. Everybody speaks American here, but with a different accent. And he was answered by an Englishman to whom he has said that, don't you think it's the opposite? And he did not understand what it meant. For instance, I had a positive echo in Spain because I attended a meeting where, fortunately, there were people of Podemos, Izquierda Unida, the trade unions, the Obreros, Comunidades Obreros, the Communist Party, and left intellectuals who are well known. And they all, which surprised me, were quite positive that yes, we need that. In Egypt, there was enthusiasm. Mamdouh is typical of that, enthusiasm even. And in a number of African countries, particularly in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in Senegal, in South Africa, there were sympathetic response. There seemed to be a sympathetic response from people in Brazil. Now, but Chavez had taken an initiative which I think was childish, was to say we need to just proclaim it. And the first party which will be member of this international is my Venezuelan Bolivarian party. I say to Chavez himself directly, I think the process is much more difficult than just saying we have created. Lenin could do it in 17 because there had been the October Revolution, victorious. Yeah. So the project is not moving. My personal idea, but this is not, is that there should be perhaps, I'm not saying more than that, the good way to have it is to have national committees in favor of that, but significant committees with a number of people who are representative. Say, and try to build it. First in their home country, precisely because it is at that point that you have the maximal animosities. Anyway, the project doesn't move. For instance, we had a project which was, and Mamdouh is very sad about that, because he was very enthusiastic, a project of a meeting in Mexico, which would have brought together at least quite a number of Latin American organizations, and the project doesn't move. We don't know what are the reasons. I say maybe they are practical reasons, financial and others of that kind, but maybe it's more severe than that. It's a political demise of the project by important forces. You see, so I have not seen arguments, and less to say serious arguments, against it. The Chinese Communist Party and possibly other organizations in China could support the idea. They cannot play the role of the old Bolshevik party vis-à-vis the others, the big brother and the small brothers. It would not be advisable, but they know they cannot play that role also, fortunately. So that's not the point. But they should not be unaware of the importance. Let me say, I give another example because it's a personal one. You know it because it's in my memories. Revolution. That was supported, it was in the Maoist period, 63. And it was in connection, strong connection with Tsui. it was at that level, through a comrade whose name was Wang Hui, not Hui, Hui. I don't know whether it was his real name or not. He died, unfortunately. He was an old man already at that time. They supported it. And they gave a financial support. That is, China's government was buying, I don't know, 20,000 copies, which was covering all the costs, and which they were distributing through the embassies everywhere. So, if they want to support, they have means. You know, where I am very, perhaps optimistic, is if at some top level, Chinese and Russians are convinced by our arguments about the dangers for them as countries, maybe they would be very helpful.